The mountain village woke to mist so thick you could not see your own hand. The old bell in the square tolled once, twice, 3 times. Everyone knew what it meant. Death was coming. He came every 7th sunset, they said. Always at dusk, when the light turned purple and the shadows grew long. He walked the roads looking for the one whose time had ended. No one could hide. No one could run. When death called your name, you went. Old Mira sat by her fire, her hands busy with her loom. She was 73 years old, her back bent like a question mark, her fingers gnarled like tree roots. But her eyes were bright, sharp as a girl's. The villagers loved her. She made herbal tea for sick children. She told stories that made people laugh until their bellies hurt. She wove blankets so soft they felt like clouds. But lately people whispered. Mira was growing weaker. Her cough had returned. Her steps were slower. Death will come for her soon, the baker said. Any day now, the blacksmith agreed. But Mira only smiled when she heard the bell. She stirred her pot of stew and hummed an old lullaby. Not today, she whispered to the fire. Not today. Myra's house sat at the edge of the village, beneath a twisted oak tree older than memory. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves holding jars of dried herbs. Mint, chamomile, sage, things with names the young people had forgotten. In the center of the room stood her loom, tall and wooden, worn smooth by decades of use. Every day, Mira sat before it, weaving thread into blankets. Each one was different. Each one told a story. This morning, she was making a blanket for little Ao, the orphan boy who lived with the baker. Winter was coming, and Ao had no warm clothes. Myra's fingers moved steadily, pulling red thread through white, creating patterns like flames dancing in snow. Every stitch is a memory, she told herself. Every thread is a life I've touched. The villagers said her weaving kept death away. They said as long as her hands moved, her heart would beat. Some even believed the threads held magic. Mira did not believe in magic. She believed in love. She believed that as long as someone needed her, she had a reason to stay. She thought of Ao's thin shoulders, the way he shivered in the morning cold. She smiled and pulled another thread tight. Just a little longer, she whispered. Just until this one is done. That night, the wind changed. It blew cold from the mountains, carrying the smell of snow and something else, something old and final. Mira lay in her narrow bed, a single candle burning on the table beside her. The flame stood straight and tall at first, but then it began to bend. Not from the wind. There was no wind inside. The flame bent toward her like a finger pointing. Myra's heart beat faster. She knew this sign. Her grandmother had told her about it long ago. When the candle bends toward you, someone is coming. Someone you cannot refuse. The room grew colder. Her breath came out in white clouds. The shadows on the walls grew darker, deeper, as if they were gathering. Then she felt it, a presence standing at the foot of her bed. She could not see it clearly, but she knew. Oh, she knew. A voice, soft as falling leaves, filled the room. Mira. She did not scream. She did not cry. She sat up slowly, her old bones creaking, and looked toward the shadow. I hear you, she said quietly. But I'm not ready yet. The shadow did not move. The candle flame bent lower, almost touching the wax. The voice came again, patient but firm. Your time has come. The shadow stepped forward, and Mira finally saw him clearly. Death was not a skeleton with hollow eyes like the story said. He was a man, tall and thin, wrapped in a cloak that looked like smoke. His face was pale, almost beautiful, but his eyes were ancient, filled with sorrow deeper than oceans. He stood at the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, the other holding a staff carved from black wood. Mira, he said again, and his voice was not cruel. It was tired. I have walked a long road to reach you. Do not make this harder than it must be. Mira pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I know who you are, and I know why you've come. Then you understand. It is time. She looked at him for a long moment, her mind working fast. Then she smiled, a small, clever smile. If my time has truly come, she said, then grant me one last wish. Let me finish the blanket I am weaving. It is for a child who has never known warmth. Surely you can wait one more night. Death's eyes narrowed. No one had ever asked him to wait. People begged, screamed, wept, but they did not bargain. He studied her face, searching for fear. He found none. One night, he said at last, "No more." Death sat in the corner of the room, silent as stone, watching. Mira returned to her loom, her hands trembling slightly, but steady enough. She pulled the red thread, then the white, weaving them together in patterns only she understood. The room was quiet except for the soft click of the loom and the crackling of the fire. Outside, the village slept, unaware that Death himself sat in the grandmother's house. After a while, Mira began to hum. It was an old song, one her mother had sung to her when she was small. A lullaby about rivers and stars and the way the world turns in circles. Death's head lifted. He knew that song. He had heard it 1,000 years ago, sung by a mother to a dying child. He had heard it in palaces and in mud huts, in times of war and times of peace. Without thinking, he began to hum along. Mira glanced at him, surprised. "You know this song?" "I know all the songs," Death said quietly. "I have heard every lullaby ever sung. I have been there when mothers rock their babies for the last time. I have stood beside deathbeds where old lovers hum to each other in the dark." His voice cracked just slightly. Myra's hand slowed. "Then you understand," she said softly, "why I cannot leave yet." Death said nothing, but his eyes, ancient and sad, seemed to understand more than he wanted to. Morning came fast, painting the sky pink and gold. Mira had not slept. She had woven all night, and now the blanket was nearly finished, just a few more rows. She stood, her back aching, and walked to the window. Below, the village was waking. Smoke rose from chimneys. Chickens clucked. Children's voices echoed through the square. Then she heard it, a scream. Myra's heart clenched. She threw open the door and ran, her old legs moving faster than they had in years. Death followed, a silent shadow at her heels. At the river's edge, a crowd had gathered. Little A.O., the orphan boy, had slipped on the wet stones and fallen into the rushing water. His head bobbed once, twice, then disappeared beneath the current. "Someone help him," the baker screamed. But the river was cold and fast. No one moved. Mira did not think. She dove. The icy water hit her like a fist, knocking the breath from her lungs. Her old body screamed in protest, but she kicked forward, reaching, searching. Her fingers brushed cloth. She grabbed it. She pulled A.O. to the surface, gasping, choking. Hands reached down and dragged them both onto the bank. A.O. coughed up water and began to cry. Mira collapsed beside him, shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The villagers cheered. They wrapped her in blankets. They called her a hero. But when Mira looked around, Death was gone. By noon, the entire village knew. Old Mira had saved the boy. Old Mira, who should have been too weak, too frail, had jumped into the river and pulled him out. "It's a miracle," the women said, clutching their prayer beads. "She's blessed," the men agreed. Children crowded around her house, peeking through the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of the grandmother who had outrun death. Mira sat by her fire, drying her hair, her body still trembling from the cold. She did not feel blessed. She felt tired, but she also felt something else, relief. Death had left. He had broken his word. For the first time in eternity, he had walked away before claiming his due. Why? She did not know. But she knew this. She had bought herself time. How much, she could not say, but time enough to finish the blanket. Time enough to keep her promise. That evening, a merchant from the next village arrived. His name was Goro, a fat man with rings on every finger and eyes like a fox. He had heard the story and came to see for himself. He stood in Myra's doorway, arms crossed, his lip curled in a sneer. "So," he said, "you're the one who cheated death." Mira looked up from her loom. "I didn't cheat anyone. I only asked for time." Goro laughed, harsh and cold. "No one can cheat death twice, old woman. You'll see." Goro was not a kind man. He owned 3 shops, 2 farms, and a house bigger than the village hall. But it was never enough. He wanted more. Always more. When people began speaking of Mira as a miracle worker, Goro grew jealous. Pilgrims came to her door, offering coins, asking for blessings. They said her touch could heal. They said her prayers could protect. Mira refused their money. I am no witch, she said gently. I'm only an old woman with promises to keep. But the more she refused, the more they believed, and the more Goro burned with envy. She's a fraud, he told the blacksmith. She probably pushed the boy into the river herself, then saved him for attention. The blacksmith frowned. That's a cruel thing to say. Cruel, maybe, but true. Goro began spreading rumors. He told people Mira had made a pact with dark spirits. He said she was using forbidden magic to cling to life. Some believed him. Others did not. But doubt, once planted, grows like weeds. One evening, Goro stood in the square and shouted, "If she's truly blessed, let her prove it. Let death come for her again, and we'll see if she can escape twice." The villagers murmured uneasily. Mira, passing by with a basket of herbs, stopped and looked at him. Her eyes were calm, unbothered. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "I'll teach him patience." The crowd gasped. Goro's face turned red with rage. That night, the air grew heavy. The stars disappeared behind clouds. The wind stopped, and the world held its breath. Mira sat by her loom, weaving the last rows of Ao's blanket. Her hands moved steadily, but her heart was not calm. She knew he would come. She had felt it all day, the weight of his gaze, the cold certainty. The candle flickered. The door creaked open, though no hand had touched it. Death stepped inside, and this time his face was hard. His eyes, once sorrowful, now burned with something close to anger. "You broke the pact, Mira." She did not look up. "I saved a child. You were supposed to come with me, and I will." She tied off the final thread and set the blanket aside. "When I am ready." Death's grip tightened on his staff. "You think you can bargain with me again?" Mira stood slowly, her old bones aching. She faced him without fear. "I don't want to bargain, but I will ask you for one more thing. I owe you nothing." "Then take me now," she said quietly. "But we only tell you one last story before we go." Death stared at her, his jaw tight. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to be done with this stubborn old woman. But something in her voice, calm, gentle, sad, made him pause. "One story," he said. "Then we leave. No more delays." Mira nodded. She sat by the fire and gestured for him to sit across from her. And so Death sat and listened. Myra's voice was soft, like water over stones. "When I was young," she began, "the village faced a terrible famine. The rains did not come. The crops withered. Children cried from hunger, and mothers wept because they had nothing to give." Death listened, his face expressionless. "I was only a girl, but I had a small bag of seeds my grandmother had given me before she died. She told me, 'Plant these when the world is dark. They will grow when hope is gone.'" Myra's eyes grew distant, remembering. "I didn't want to plant them. I wanted to eat them. I was so hungry, my stomach hurt every night. But I thought of my grandmother's words. So I went to the edge of the village and buried every seed, even though I knew I might never see them grow." She paused, her voice trembling. 3 years later, after I had forgotten, a traveler came through the village. He said he had seen the most beautiful trees growing wild near the road. Apple trees, heavy with fruit. He said it was a miracle. Mira looked at Death. "Those are my seeds. They fed the village for 20 years. Death's eyes softened just slightly. "You gave without knowing if you would receive." "Yes," Mira said, "because hope is not about seeing the harvest. It's about planting anyway." For the first time, Death felt something strange in his chest, something warm, almost painful. He did not know what to call it, but Mira did. It was called compassion. Death stood abruptly. "Enough. The story is over. Now you must come." Mira rose slowly, her joints creaking. She looked at him with steady eyes. "Then let's go." But as she moved toward the door, something inside her sparked. An old, wild fire she thought had died long ago. She bolted. Death's eyes widened in shock. "Mira!" She ran out the door and into the night, her bare feet pounding the dirt road. Behind her, she heard his voice, sharp and commanding. "You cannot run from me." But she did. She ran faster than her old body should allow, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. She ran past the baker's house, past the blacksmith's forge, past the square where the bell hung silent. She ran into the forest, where the trees grew thick and the moonlight barely touched the ground. Death followed, swift and silent as a shadow. His cloak billowed behind him like smoke. He did not run. He glided, moving through the air itself. But every time he reached for her, something stopped him. A branch swung low. A root rose up. A bird cried out, startling him for just a moment. Mira laughed, a breathless, joyful sound. She was not running from fear. She was running because she was alive, because her heart still beat, because the wind still felt good on her skin. Even the world helps her, Death muttered, disbelief creeping into his voice. The chase went on through the night. The moon climbed higher, casting silver light through the trees. Myra's legs burned. Her lungs screamed, but she did not stop. She leaped over streams. She ducked beneath low branches. She ran along narrow paths only she remembered from her childhood. Death was always behind her, close but never close enough. His frustration grew. He, who had claimed kings and beggars, warriors and children, could not catch one old woman. "Why do you run?" he called out, his voice echoing through the forest. "You will only tire yourself. You will only make it worse." Mira did not answer. She saved her breath. She reached a clearing where wildflowers grew in thick patches, glowing faintly in the moonlight. She stumbled, her foot catching on a rock, and fell to her knees. Death stopped at the edge of the clearing, his staff raised. "It is over, Mira." She looked up at him, gasping for air, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. But she was smiling. "Not yet," she whispered. And then, as if the world itself had heard her, the wind picked up. It swirled around her, lifting her hair, filling her lungs. Strength poured into her limbs. She stood and ran again. Death watched her go, and for the first time in eternity, he felt something he had never felt before. Doubt. Mira ran until she reached the hidden shrine deep in the forest. It was a place most villagers had forgotten, a stone altar covered in moss, surrounded by carvings worn smooth by time. The carvings showed two figures, one holding a seed, the other holding a scythe. Life and death standing side by side, not as enemies but as partners in the endless dance of existence. Mira fell to her knees before the altar, her chest heaving. She did not pray for herself. She prayed for Death. "Let him remember," she whispered. "Let him remember what mercy feels like." Behind her, Death entered the clearing. He moved slowly now, his anger faded, replaced by something quieter. Confusion. Weariness. He stood before the altar and looked at the carvings. He had not seen this place in centuries. He had forgotten it existed. "Why do you pray for me?" he asked softly. Mira looked up at him, her eyes wet with tears. "Because you are lonely. Because you carry the weight of every soul you take. Because no one has ever thanked you for your work." Death's hand trembled on his staff. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever seen him as anything more than a thief, a monster, an ending. "I do not need your pity," he said, his voice cracking. "It's not a pity," Mira said. "It's compassion." The word hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. While Mira hid in the shrine, the jealous merchant Goro followed her trail. He had watched from the village, seen her run into the forest, and decided this was his chance. "If I find her," he muttered to himself, "I'll prove she's a fraud. I'll expose her tricks." He carried a lantern, its light bobbing through the trees. He did not believe in death walking the earth. He believed only in gold, power, and his own cleverness. When he reached the shrine, he saw the ancient altar and the carvings. His eyes gleamed with greed. Among the stones lay a small amulet, half buried in moss, a tarnished silver pendant engraved with symbols. "Treasure," Goro whispered, snatching it up. The moment his fingers closed around it, the air turned cold. The lantern flickered and died. The carvings on the altar seemed to shift, their faces twisting into warnings. Goro stumbled back, his heart pounding. "It's nothing, just superstition." But deep inside, something dark stirred. The amulet had been placed there as an offering, a balance between life and death. To take it was to break that balance. Goro shoved the amulet into his pocket and hurried back toward the village, his breath shallow, his hands shaking. Behind him, the shrine grew darker. The wind picked up, carrying a whisper that sounded like a curse. And in the shadows, Death turned his head, sensing the disturbance. His eyes narrowed. "Fool," he murmured. By morning, the village was in chaos. Children woke with fevers. Crops that had been healthy the day before withered overnight. The well water turned bitter. A shadow seemed to hang over everything, thick and choking. The baker's wife collapsed in the square, clutching her chest. The blacksmith's son could not lift his hammer. His arms had grown too weak. "It's a curse," the villagers whispered, their faces pale with fear. "It's her fault," someone said, pointing toward Myra's house. The old woman angered Death. "Now we all suffer." Goro stood in the square, his face twisted with false concern. "I warned you. She's playing with forces she doesn't understand. She must be stopped." The crowd murmured agreement. Fear makes people cruel. When Mira returned from the forest that morning, exhausted and dirty, she found her door marked with a red X, a sign of blame. Children threw stones. Women turned their backs. Even those she had helped, those she had healed, now looked at her with suspicion. Mira did not defend herself. She stood in silence, her heart breaking, and took their anger without a word. That night, she sat alone in her house, weeping, not for herself, but for them, for the fear that had poisoned their hearts. Outside, unseen, Death watched, and for the first time his cold heart ached. Death stood at the edge of the village, invisible to mortal eyes, watching the suffering spread. He had seen plagues before, curses, wars. But this was different. This was not his doing. He had come from Mira, yes, but he had not brought sickness. He had not cursed the land. Something else was at work, something born of greed and broken sacred ground. His gaze turned toward Goro's house, large and opulent at the far end of the village. He could feel it, the stolen amulet, pulsing with dark energy, unbalanced and angry. "Fool," Death muttered again. "He has broken the covenant." But the villagers did not know this. They blamed Mira, and that blame, that cruelty, hurt Death more than he expected. He had spent eternity taking souls. He had been feared, hated, cursed. He had accepted it. That was his role. But watching Mira suffer for something she did not cause, watching her take the village's anger with grace, stirred something deep inside him. For the first time, Death questioned his purpose. He had thought his job was to end life. But what if it was something more? What if he was supposed to teach people about mercy, about the value of each moment? What if all this time he'd been learning from them? He looked at Myra's small house, the light flickering in her window. She was weaving again, even now, creating warmth for others, even as they cursed her name. Death closed his eyes, and for the first time in eternity, he felt something like respect. The curse grew worse. By the third day, Goro himself fell ill. He lay in his bed, sweating, his skin burning. The amulet lay on his bedside table, blackened now, as if scorched by invisible fire. "Help me," he gasped to his servants. "Bring the healer. Bring the priest. Bring anyone." But no one could help him. The sickness was not of the body. It was of the soul. That night, as Goro thrashed in fevered dreams, his door opened. A cold wind filled the room, snuffing out every candle. Death stepped inside. Goro's eyes flew open. He saw the tall figure, the cloak of smoke, the staff of blackwood. Terror seized him. "No," Goro whispered. "Not me. Take someone else. Take the old woman. She's the one you want." Death's voice was cold, final. "You took what was not yours. You broke the balance. And now it takes you. Please," Goro begged, tears streaming down his face. "I'll give it back. I'll do anything." Death lifted his staff. Too late. But before he could strike, a voice called from the doorway. "Wait." Death turned. Mira stood there, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes fierce. "Don't take him," she said. Death stared at her in disbelief. "He cursed your village. He turned them against you. He deserves this." "Perhaps," Mira said softly, "but I do not wish it." Death's grip tightened on his staff. Why? Why beg for the one who destroyed you? Mira stepped into the room, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. She looked at Goro, who lay trembling, his face wet with tears. Because, she said quietly, compassion is what separates life from death. Death's eyes widened. Those words, they struck him like a blow to the chest. He does not deserve your mercy, Death said, his voice rough. Maybe not, Mira agreed. But mercy is not about what people deserve. It's about who we choose to be. She knelt beside Goro's bed and took his hand. He flinched, but she held on gently. Give back what you stole, she told him. Return the amulet to the shrine. Make things right. Goro sobbed. I can't. I'm too weak. Then I will do it for you. Mira picked up the blackened amulet, and it burned her palm. She gasped but did not drop it. She wrapped it in cloth and tucked it into her shawl. Death watched her, torn between duty and something he could not name. You offer your life for his, Death said slowly. You know this, don't you? If you carry that amulet back to the shrine, it will take what's left of your strength. You will not survive the journey. Mira met his gaze. Her eyes were calm, accepting. I know. Death lowered his staff. For the first time in eternity, he could not bring himself to claim his soul. He stepped back, his voice barely a whisper. Then go. Mira nodded and walked out into the night. The journey back to the shrine nearly killed her. Each step was agony. The amulet burned through the cloth, searing her skin. Her legs shook, her vision blurred, but she did not stop. She thought of Ao, the boy she had saved. She thought of all the children she had helped, all the blankets she had woven, all the kindness she had given freely without asking for anything in return. This is my last thread, she whispered to herself. Let it be a good one. The forest seemed darker now, the trees pressing close. Shadows moved at the edge of her vision, but she kept walking. Finally, she reached the shrine. She fell to her knees before the altar and placed the amulet back in its resting place. The moment it touched the stone, the shadows scattered. The air warmed. The curse lifted like fog under the morning sun. Mira collapsed, her body spent, her heart slowing. Above her, the stars shone brighter than they had in days. She smiled, her eyes closing. I kept my promise, she whispered. All of them. And then, a shadow fell over her. Death knelt beside her, his face no longer cold. His eyes were wet. You should have let him die, Death said softly. You should have saved yourself. Myra's lips curved into the faintest smile. And missed the chance to teach Death about mercy? Never. Death let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. It was the first time he had cried in 1,000 years. By dawn, the sickness was gone. Children woke with clear eyes. The crops stood tall again. The well water ran sweet and cold. It was as if the curse had never been. The villagers gathered in the square, confused and relieved. They did not know what had happened. They only knew they were saved. Someone pointed toward the forest. Look, a soft light drifted from the trees toward the village, golden, warm, like a lantern carried gently home. The baker gasped. It's her. It's Mira. But it was not her body they saw. It was something else. A presence. A memory of kindness so strong it had become light. The villagers fell to their knees, tears streaming down their faces. They understood now. Mira had saved them. Again. One last time. Goro staggered from his house, weak but alive. He looked at the light and wept. Forgive me, he cried. Forgive me. The light did not answer. It simply moved through the village, touching each house, each person with warmth. And then it drifted toward the hills, fading into the rising sun. The baker's wife whispered, she's gone. But the blacksmith shook his head. No, she's still here. In every kindness we show, in every hand we extend, she'll never truly be gone. And deep in the forest, Death stood alone at the shrine, holding Myra's shawl. For the first time in eternity, he felt both sorrow and gratitude. Days passed. The village mourned, but they also celebrated. They spoke of Myra's kindness, her courage, her unshakable compassion. Goro returned the rest of his stolen wealth, piece by piece, to those he had wronged. He built a shelter for the poor, naming it after Mira. He was never the same. Greed had been burned out of him, replaced by humility. Children sang songs about the grandmother who outran death, not through speed, but through love and death. He continued his work as he always had, but something had changed in him. When he came for souls now, he came gently. He spoke their names with kindness. He reminded them of the good they had done. He no longer saw himself as an ending. He saw himself as part of the circle, the final thread that completed the weaving. One evening, Death stood at the edge of the village, invisible, watching children play. One of them was Ao, wrapped in the red and white blanket Mira had finished for him. "Thank you," Ao whispered to the sky, clutching the blanket close. "For saving me, for keeping me warm." Death smiled, a rare, sad, beautiful smile. "She changed me," he said softly to no one. "I no longer come for you. I will come with you when you are ready." And in that moment, Death understood. Mira had not outrun him. She had walked beside him all along, teaching him with every step what it meant to live. Years passed like water over stones, smooth and steady. The village grew. New children were born. Old ones became parents, then grandparents. But one thing did not change. Every year, on the anniversary of Myra's death, the villagers gathered at the shrine to honor her memory. They brought flowers, bread, woven cloth. They told stories of her kindness, passing them down like treasures. And in Myra's old house, now cared for by Ao, who had grown into a strong, kind man, the loom still stood. He had learned to weave from watching her. He made blankets for those who had none, continuing her work. One evening, as Ao sat at the loom, pulling thread through the frame, he felt a presence behind him. He turned. An old woman stood in the doorway, her eyes bright, her smile familiar. "Mira," he whispered, his heart pounding. She shook her head gently. "Only a memory, child, but memories are powerful things." Ao's throat tightened. "I miss you, and I see you," she said softly. "I see the man you become. I see the kindness you carry. You honor me well." She stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. It felt warm, real. "Finish the weaving. There are still so many who need warmth." And then she was gone, like mist under the morning sun. Ao wiped his tears and returned to the loom, his hands steady. The threads moved through his fingers, red and white, creating patterns like flames dancing in snow. More years passed. Ao grew old, his hair turning silver, his back bending. But his hands never stopped weaving. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, Ao sat by the fire, his last blanket nearly complete. It was the most beautiful one he had ever made, woven with threads of every color, each one representing a life he had touched, a kindness he had given. He felt a familiar presence and looked up. Death stood in the doorway, his cloak no longer dark, but shimmering with soft light. Ao was not afraid. He smiled. "You've come." "Yes," Death said gently. "It is time." Ao nodded. He stood slowly, his old bones creaking, and folded the blanket carefully. "Will you take this with you? To give to someone who needs it?" Death's eyes softened. "I will." Ao took Death's hand, and together they walked out into the snow. Behind them, the loom stood silent, its work complete. The villagers found him the next morning, sitting peacefully in his chair, a smile on his face. They buried him beside Mira, under the twisted oak tree. And on his grave, they placed the most beautiful blanket anyone had ever seen. The children said that on cold nights, you could still hear the sound of the loom clicking softly, as if someone, somewhere, was still weaving warmth into the world. The story spread beyond the village, carried by travelers and traders, poets and priests. "Have you heard," they would say, "about the grandmother who outran death? Not through speed," others would answer, "but through love." The tale became legend. It was told in grand halls and humble huts, in cities by the sea and villages in the mountains. Each telling added new colors, new details, but the heart remained the same. Kindness cannot be killed. Compassion cannot be buried. Love outlives even death itself. In time, the story reached a kingdom far away, where a young queen faced a terrible choice. Her advisors urged war. Her generals demanded blood. But she remembered the tale of Mira and chose mercy instead. Peace followed. In another land, a bitter old man who had lost everything heard the story from a child. That night, he wept for the first time in years. The next morning, he opened his door and helped his neighbor carry water. Small kindness, but it was a beginning. The story kept spreading, like seeds on the wind, taking root in hearts that had forgotten how to hope. And somewhere, in the space between worlds, Mira and Death walked together through fields of light. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but as old friends who had taught each other what it meant to truly live. Do you regret it? Death asked her. Running from me? Fighting so hard? Mira smiled, her face young again, free from pain. Not for a moment. You needed someone to show you that endings can be gentle, that even you deserve compassion. Death nodded slowly. And I needed to show you that letting go can be a gift, too. They walked on, side by side, through eternity. Today, if you travel to that mountain village, you'll find a statue in the square. It shows an old woman at her loom, her hands pulling thread, her face calm and kind. Beneath it, carved in stone, are these words. She wove warmth when the world was cold. She gave mercy when others gave blame. She taught Death himself that love is stronger than any ending. Children play around the statue, laughing and safe. Travelers stop to rest in its shade. And every evening, as the sun sets and the shadows grow long, the villagers gather to tell the story once more. They speak of the grandmother who outran death, not with her feet, but with her heart. They say that on quiet nights, when the wind blows through the valley, you can hear her laughter. Soft, joyful, eternal. Some claim they see her sometimes, walking the roads at dusk, checking on the lonely, comforting the sick, weaving invisible threads that hold the world together. Is she a ghost? The children ask. No, the elders answer, smiling. She's a promise, a reminder that as long as someone remembers kindness, death can never truly win. And when the wind whispers through the twisted oak tree, past the shrine, through the village square, it carries words that sound like a blessing. Kindness does not die. Love does not fade. And those who give without counting the cost will never truly leave us. The story ends, but its lesson lives on, woven into every act of compassion, every moment of mercy, every choice to love when hate seems easier. For that is how we outrun death. Not by living forever, but by leaving behind something that does. Moral of the story: death cannot catch what love keeps alive. Compassion and courage can turn even the end into a beginning. The legacy of kindness outlives us all. Please support us by hitting the like, share, and subscribe button.